A quick look at and let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. So we're going to start by, before we even get into leveraging these AI tools, why are business conversations so critical for executives and elevating and converting your deals? And we know from research that executives want to talk about their business 4 times more than they might want to talk about your products or services. But the research also says that executives find sellers and marketers, all of us on this call, 4 times less proficient in that exact business conversation that they want to have. So we're just going to dig into that and importantly share what's the executive perspective. So when you're meeting with an executive, how do they think? And then we're going to apply the AI tools to help you research and reveal insights that will differentiate you from your competition. And importantly, tell that decision maker something they didn't already know about an opportunity, problem, risk they didn't know they had. And critically, and thanks to Mark, who spent a lot of time on this, we're going to understand why prompts are the most important element for you in terms of learning about and applying artificial intelligence for your research. And then Mark's going to step you through some very specific examples using 3 great tools. One of them everybody's heard of, which is ChatGPT, but you're going to hear about 2 others that are important with some examples on how to use. Then lastly, we're going to talk about what I call fascination to implementation. What are kind of the next steps for all of us? All right, Mark, let's go. All right, first disclaimer, really, really important for everybody. You first need to understand what are your company's rules and regulations about using AI. So when things were really starting to accelerate, a year ago, Samsung and Apple famously, this is all over the media, said, hey, none of our employees you cannot use ChatGPT at work or anything to do with Apple or Samsung because they feared, their confidential information might get entered into these large language models and therefore just become, part of the cloud and, a security risk to others. So the first thing you should understand is what is your company's policy on using these tools at work. Okay, so real quick, what kind of conversation does an executive want to have? We'll just look at 4 quadrants real quick. In the southwest corner, what's very familiar to me as a C-level executive is that somebody would come in and survey me with some questions, asking me about my business. And I don't like that. You're the survey, I'm the monkey. I don't want to be a survey monkey. I want to talk about my business. I don't want to answer questions that you could find out from the research that Mark's about to share. The second type is that northwest corner of interviewing. It's like maybe you've done a little more research and you've got better questions, but why should I play 20 questions to teach you about my business? How in the world is that in my interest? The southeast corner is probably the worst. That's what I call the information or the death by PowerPoint. It's the 50-page PowerPoint. Where is the power? What's the point? What I really crave as a decision maker, and Mark would say the same from his own experience, is you want to have a conversation that shows the person we're meeting with has brought a level of intellectual altitude to the dialogue and is telling me something I didn't already know about an opportunity, problem, or a risk I didn't know I had. And that's what we're going to dig into. So real quick, what is that executive perspective? Well, everything starts with external factors that are out of that decision maker's control. So it's everything such as interest rates, geopolitics, oil prices, all of these elements, technology changes, rate of change, competition, everything that's out of control of a decision maker. And that's critical because their business initiatives or strategies are always shaped and created by those external factors. So if you think about any strategy for your customer, it's always offensive or it's defensive, shaped and created by those external factors. But that's not enough. They need a greater level of business change. And then they're looking for financial proof from you to underpin a buying vision. And executives say they're 70% more likely to partner with a vendor that can articulate a vision for their business. So let's get into how you can go about gaining insights to help them create that vision.
So Jim, let me pick up here. One of the key things that we do when we have the live conversations and as C-suite executives is that we really start focusing on this idea of return on research. It's appreciating that research is in many ways for a seller a necessary evil. That's not necessarily what they're paid to do. They're paid to have face time with customers, but they have to be informed, particularly for that executive conversation. And what we often think about is that dimension of time. We know how long it takes us to do the research, but we have to think about value, what makes valuable research. So we have that concept that actually where we want to be is in this quadrant where we have the least amount of time and the highest amount of value. And that's really want to occupy. So when I then think about that, that's my human research. How do I augment that with AI? Well, there's really two strategies I can use. I can actually try and say, can I get differentiating research that really sets me apart from the information that other people will be able to find, and move it into a space where actually I can do that with less time using AI tools? And also, can I just elevate the value of research that I've done to put it more into the business context? And can I, again, do that quickly? Time is critical in all of these elements. So let's look at probably the first and the most important principle, and you introduced it, which is this idea of prompt engineering. Why is prompt engineering so important? Well, input determines output, right? We've always known this, but it's just so true here. Classically, there's something that we call, when we look at models that model the world and help business people, what we call the RERO model. And the RERO model is rubbish in, rubbish out. And this becomes really important when you think about AI and generative AI as an amplification engine, something that can give you exponential potential. Then being really, really careful about how you program it, how you actually condition it, what are you putting as an input is absolutely critical. And I know, Jim, you have some thoughts on this as well, right? I mean, this is a sort of central part, and why is this so important now?
Yeah, so think of it this way. Imagine the internet was invented yesterday, and that all the search engines we use today, whether it's Google or Bing, or might use Safari, which is Google default, or Yahoo search. Imagine all those engines were invented today, and you were learning about the internet for the first time. You'd want to understand which tools should I use, which ones are better for different applications, what am I most comfortable with and like personally. So what Mark's going to get into is really that first exploration of these new tools. And many of us have been using ChatGPT. That's one that is going to be critically important, but you need to be familiar and comfortable with these tools.
And just to sort of say the why now, the way that I think about this is that the internet opened up a huge opportunity for all of us when we think back to when that was actually created, and search was our way of engaging with it. When we now think about it, prompting is our way of engaging with this much, much bigger universe. And it is because it is so much bigger that we have to be careful about the prompts. If we don't precisely control the prompt, we're going to actually get hallucinations out on the other side, or we're not really sure about the data, or it'll actually overwhelm us. We'll actually have more information than we can actually cope with. So let's talk about what makes a great prompt. And there is a formula. The good news is that there is a formula for prompt engineering. So we've simplified this. You'll find different versions, but this one actually, in my experience, gives you a pretty good and simple approach to it. It's just 5 steps. The prompt should contain something that describes the task, the context. It should give very clear instruction. It should ask the AI model, a large language model, to clarify whether it understood your instructions. And you should think about refinement, both in an iterative sense with the prompt, but also what kind of style or specifics do you want. Linked to that, we've started to actually sort of say, well, what are critical elements that you need to put in? An action verb, right? What do I want the AI model to do? Do I want it to generate something or analyze something? What's its end goal? Context is really interesting. It sets the scene, it gives you the background, it gives you the environment so that the AI can tune itself to that environment. But it's also important to limit the possibilities. Back to this idea of not having things that go too broad or are too large. Limiting possibilities is really critical. Instructions are the details and the examples that you provide that actually says, this is what I want you to do. This is the task I want you to do. It gives you a much more precise detail of those approaches. And it also gives you, for example, this is the sort of thing that I'd like to get in response. Clarification, as we've already covered, does the AI model understand your instructions? And then we can talk about refinement as we go through. For me, there's nothing better.
Mark, I'm just going to add, you can't have great AI results without understanding how to craft a great prompt. And there's important insights on that. And you've got an example right here.
Absolutely, Jim. And the other thing I would sort of say is that there are plenty of tools around that will give you a shortcut, but I would really encourage people to try and write their own prompts using this relatively simple 5-step process, because that personal experience and understanding what you get out, input equals output, input drives output, that understanding is what will start to set you apart as an individual in your use of AI. There are prompt libraries. I use a prompt library called ARPM, which is basically embedded inside ChatGPT, and you can see different prompts for different tasks. There are many ways of sourcing prompts, but actually the construction yourself will give you a real insight into how to actually create great prompts. So let me give you an example here. Here's an example. It's as simple as writing an email to my boss, right? But I wanted to share some positive news. It's about a new product launch. I'm a senior product manager. I've just got a collaboration of an in-car app with Tesla. We've exceeded our expectations. We're 200% higher than target with the pre-orders. I want to make sure that we've got some project background, some business results. I want to thank the product and engineering team. I want to make sure that the large language model understands us. And then I really want to use clear and concise language. I want it to use clear and concise language in a confident yet friendly tone. So that prompt follows this breakdown and should give you a pretty good result when you're starting to look at what you get out. Just again, a reminder, we're feeding in 2 types of prompts. We're feeding in the prompt, but we're also feeding in the framework. So remember, we're now talking about executive conversations, those elevated conversations at a higher altitude. Jim has already shared with us that actually that business conversation is one that orients on the external factors, the business initiatives, the business change that drives, and the financial proof that it's worth investing in. So the other input that we're putting in is our framework of thinking, the buyer's perspective. So solid prompt engineering, buyer's perspective, putting it into the AI tools, we should get a pretty good output. The first one we're going to use is ChatGPT. Jim, do you want to just give us a quick intro to ChatGPT?
Yeah, so this is the one that we're probably all the most familiar with, but look how quickly our world has changed. And this is a huge difference than the way the search engines we're familiar with, Google, Bing, and others have developed. This is all happening so quickly, just being launched by OpenAI. I do recommend there's a ChatGPT Plus. That's another $20 a month. I do recommend doing this because it's going to give you better tools, better access to information. And just to show you, just how big and huge this is going to change our world, Microsoft put $10 billion into ChatGPT. And it looks like next week there's going to be a stock tender offer that's going to value ChatGPT at over $90 billion. And everything here, it's in its infancy. So this is one that's going to be as important to our lives as Google is. So you need to be very familiar with ChatGPT, but Mark's going to talk about 2 others as well.
Absolutely. So for those who've not had a chance to play with it, this is the sort of interface that you'll get when you open OpenAI's homepage. If you're a subscriber, I've got my access to ChatGPT, which is the subscription paid model. You'll also see DALL-E here, which is their images model. So this is to be able to take text and turn it into images. This is another reason why prompts become so important, because we're not just opening up the universe of words here, we're opening up the universe of data, we're opening up the universe of images, and audio. So ultimately, this is going to actually generate the whole universe of different multimodal inputs and outputs. So what I've done is I've actually, in my interface, I have taken the prompt that we worked on following those 5 steps, and I've put it into ChatGPT. And within seconds, this is what it actually spits out for me. This is what it actually creates. It gives me a subject line: outstanding results for Tesla in-car app launch. It follows my instructions pretty well. It talks about the delight I have to share this positive news. It gives me that project background and actually talks, and this is, I didn't give all of this information. It's filling this out based on the context that I provided, sufficient context. It gives about the business results that I'd included. It's staying quite true. It's not hallucinating. It talks about the 12,000 pre-orders, 200% the initial target. And it gives that acknowledgement to the team that I requested, and the tone's pretty good. Is this ready to press send? My answer is nothing that you get from AI is ever ready to press send until you've really vetted it and proofread it and take ownership for it. It is not the AI writing to your boss. It is the AI helping you write to your boss or any other customer. So just a quick example of how we could actually use a tool like that.
Hey, Mark, I just wanted to add, this one's a great example because having written hundreds or thousands of these over 3 decades, just to collect that information, get my thoughts together, think about my audience, construct an email, that would take some time. Or this is something that you were able to put together in a couple of minutes. So the efficiency this is going to realize, it's incredible.
Absolutely. And part of that prompt engineering is also that personalization, Jim. So it's also about being able to, for example, take 5 or 6 examples of emails that you've written that you like. This is your own style, your own tone, and use that as part of what you're putting into the prompt, so that actually the AI says, okay, I get this. This is what I want to sound like. This is how Jim wants to come across. And that's why prompt engineering formula are #1 tip and trick for how you can actually use AI in an effective way to get the highest value out of the time that you spend on your research.
Yep. So, Mark, I've got a big meeting with Shailesh, who's the chief operating officer of Procter & Gamble. And since you're in the C-suite at Procter & Gamble,
know him well. We were out in Asia together, so
right,
I know
you're living in
Shailesh.
Singapore, right?
Customer.
So, hey, Mark, I've got this big meeting with Shailesh coming up. I'm currently working at a SaaS company with a cloud computing solution that can really help them with their supply chain model, better efficiency, and everybody's focused on ESG and reducing carbon footprint. But I really don't. This is an important meeting, but I don't have much time to prepare.
Okay.
Can you help?
Well, listen, I'm sure it's important to you to do this both quickly, but also to have high quality research, right? So here's what I'm going to do first. We've talked about prompt engineering, so I'm already going to use that formula. I'm going to think about it. But my first differentiating act is to say, could I make my prompt even better? Right? So I try to make a really good prompt using that formula. Could I make it even better? And actually, here's interesting. We're getting a little bit meta here, but what if I use ChatGPT to help me make the prompt for ChatGPT? Sounds a little bit like a loop, and who knows, maybe we're going to end up in one of those films where we're endlessly in this loop. But it's a really smart use. Can you use ChatGPT to create great ChatGPT prompts? And in fact, the engineers at DeepMind, the ones that run IBM there, they've actually done some research that says that large language models are better at prompting large language models than humans. So this is also an area that we're going to get into. What does that actually look like? Okay, so let's look at it in real terms. I'm still using my prompt engineering structure, those 5 steps that we outlined before, but I'm actually writing a prompt that is around helping GPT to write me an even more effective prompt. So this time what I'm calling out is exactly that challenge you gave me, Jim, right? I want to prepare for a customer conversation at the C-suite level. I'm an experienced business-to-business salesperson. I want to win more sales conversations. I want to make sure that my messages align with your buyer's perspective. And I'm giving more instructions. I'm putting the framework in. Remember, we talked about merging in that buyer's perspective framework, external factors, business initiatives, business change, financial metrics. And I'm going to make sure that it understands what I'm looking for. So I take the prompt. I put it into ChatGPT. Good news, it's already coming out saying, yes, I understand. Okay, so let's let it play live, right? It understands that I have these goals. It's starting to give me a comprehensive research prompt. So what it's done is it's taken my prompt and it's breaking it apart and putting it together with more details. It's enriching my prompt. You can see that this is running longer. It's adding even new things that I hadn't talked about: regulatory compliance risk, customer bias perspective, and how I'd tailor my sales message. So just let's look at some of the things that it pulled out. I'm going to focus here on a few elements that link to our buyer's perspective. You talked about the importance of external factors. Beautifully, the enhanced prompt actually gives us some more detail around that. Can you see what it's done? It's introduced the pestle model for external factors on its own. I didn't give it the model to use. It's put that into my prompt saying, can you think about political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental approaches inside of the external factors? It's also sharpened my financial metrics and KPIs. It talks about revenue growth, market share, operational efficiency, stuff that occupied our minds when we're sitting on that C-suite. And lastly, it's saying, how do executives typically make buying considerations and decision-making criteria for this kind of approach that we're looking at, this kind of solution? So you can see that it's actually already starting to enhance what I put in. So again, it's just really iterating on my input. A good prompt is incredibly powerful. What I quickly do is I take that prompt and I tailor it now to the scenario you give me, Procter & Gamble, and the solution you've offered, a cloud computing solution that can improve visibility of the supply chain. So I tune it to that, and let's see what it's able to actually come out. It brings this now into the world. It's bringing that combination together. It's got the prompt, it understands my buyer's perspective model, and it now understands my specific task of working on P&G as a cloud computing solution. It pulls out some really interesting elements. Energy efficiency initiatives with government support for higher energy efficiency might be a big opportunity for P&G to think about how it improves its environmental footprint, but gets that critical government support. It also thinks about increasing fuel efficiency in regards to transportation. I've been limited here, Jim, and I've pulled out the ones relevant to external factors, but it gave me so much more across that full framework. Right, so this is just a snapshot to show you the power that we're getting out of that enhanced prompt.
Well, good. Hey, Mark, I've got a problem. The meeting with Shailesh has been moved up, so I need that research in 30 minutes. I'm going to ask you, I just find AI and understanding prompts, I'm still trying to get my head around it. So I'm going to ask you to speak to me slowly so I can understand, as if I'm a small child or a Labrador retriever. So are you saying AI is different than our history with search? Meaning, I know we both love music and you love hip hop and rap. So if you want to learn about Kendrick Lamar and butterflies, you can type that into Google. Or if you want to know about a tribe called Quest or the Wu-Tang Clan, you can type in and get a response. Are you saying that is not the approach with using ChatGPT and these others, meaning you need to use that AI to create the prompt that's going to get you the information you need? So can you just explain that to me? Because I have less than 30 minutes to get ready for this meeting.
Absolutely. So Jim, I think there's two elements there. One is that the prompt engineering concept is going to be central, which is that you've got to create a quality programming interaction. The input has to be high quality to get the quality that you want out. You can do that manually. And as I say, there's a real benefit to doing at least some of it manually to understand how it works under the bonnet, under the hood, to really get that feel for it. But once you've got that, you can look at tools that can help you. The one that we just looked at was probably in that bucket of moving from differentiated research and trying to bring it into a faster approach towards doing that. And that's really very, very helpful. If you've got a key, let's imagine that you've got a key customer and P&G is one of your 5 accounts that you manage, right? There's only 5 that you focus on. You really need to do something very different and understand that company at a different level. This will help you do that, right? Really high quality differentiated approaches, and using ChatGPT to write your prompt will be very helpful. But if you've only got 30 minutes, I'm going to reach into a different part of the toolbox here and pull out a different tool. And the tool that I really want to pull out here is one that's called AI Mind. And what it's going to do is it's going to be a lot simpler, right? It's going to give me a little bit more of that feel of that intuitive search. So Jim, I introduced you to it, but maybe you can just introduce the folks to what AI Mind is and what it does.
Yeah, so I wasn't familiar with this one personally. Mark introduced me to it. It's very intuitive. One of the things I love about it the most, I'm actually not using it that much yet, but they've got basically like a news feed, which they basically call their publication list. And they've got a daily feed of the most important thing that's happening in the world of AI each day, each week. And I'm using this almost as my single source of truth right now, just to keep up with what's happening so quickly. So even if you don't dig it and use it, at a minimum, I'd get on the site, just be familiar with it, and then look at the headlines they publish each day. I've just found it, really transformational in terms of beginning to get my head around the totality of what's happening with AI. This one has kind of a simpler prompt generator that's a bit more search engine like, and it's free and it's new. So I just remember, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and Google first happened, it was like, or the first time, first time I heard about Uber. It's like, there's a lot of, it's good like word of mouth to find out about these new things as they're happening. So Mark, let's look at an example.
Yeah, and Jim, I think the one thing I'd say before we dig into this is that there are other tools available that will give you a prompt generator. So you have to look around and play with them. The reason that we've gone for this one, again, there's also an area, as this is exploding at the moment, we're going to have a shakeout, and there are going to be fewer winners. And in 6 months, in 12 months, we'll understand a little bit more clearly who we should look at as those key horses in the race, as it were. I do quite like going into the ones that have a beta launch, because that's usually where you'll get an insight for free. So also, if you're doing this on your own watch and you're trying to learn, the beta ones are quite helpful, because you can access that without getting another $20 subscription a month that you may not want to have or not understand how to cancel. So actually, there is an art to picking some of those smaller ones, not just the big usual players. So what I like about it, again, as you said, it's got a very, very simple web-like interface. It just gives you one simple box and says, please tell us what your prompt topic is. You can make that as simple or as complicated as you want. Here, what I've done is I've taken our 5-point prompt structure and just fed it in. What it then does very, very quickly is it actually starts to offer me an improved prompt. So you can already see here that it's actually saying, as an expert in prompt engineering, I need your assistance. It's talking about external factors. It's breaking it into points. It's adding some richness to it. And as you go through, it's giving some more context. It's adding competitive landscape, customer segments, industry, technology landscape. It's also very interestingly giving me a set of follow-up questions. So think about the follow-up questions as predictive text, right? Remember when we're starting to write, and then you see actually something come up as a predicted or suggested search. This is an AI prompt engine that's giving you those follow-up questions so that you can decide what you want to do with that. Let me show you how that might work. I ran that prompt in ChatGPT. So this is generating a prompt to use in a large language model. It's not a large language model on its own. It's just generating that prompt. I ran that in ChatGPT for this challenge in regards to what conversation are we going to have with Shailesh, right? How are we going to do that? And it came up with some good financial metrics and KPIs. It talked about cost saving, it talked about ROI, it talked about carbon footprint reduction. And remember, we said this has an impact on CO2. So maybe that's the one I want to go. But it's not very granular, right? This is not really differentiated. I don't think this is the executive conversation, just sort of saying, okay, carbon footprint reduction through optimized supply chain. So what I did was I looked at what are the follow-up questions it suggested. At the bottom, it suggested one which is, could you elaborate on financial metrics and KPIs most relevant to demonstrate the value? So I just click on it, right? That's essentially as simple as that. I bring that in, put it into the chat, and then I get a much richer answer out. I get new concepts being introduced here. I get the cost savings through logistics cost, lower inventory. These are the financial concepts that I really need to have in the conversation with someone at a COO level for a large Fortune 500 company. It introduced the idea of total cost of ownership. Maybe I need to position it in a different way when I'm looking at how they really think about my solution. And again, it went into more detail around the carbon footprint and the waste aspects, the environmental and sustainability metrics. So you can see how this is going to help us in that 30 minutes you've now given me. I thought it was 30 days, but it turns out it's 30 minutes, right? To prepare for the conversation. So really helping me move forward in that sense.
So, Mark, I haven't met Shailesh before, but one of the concepts we have at Corporate Visions is, know me before you meet me, meaning your credibility with a decision maker is established in that first sentence or two of an email or conversation. So how can you help me understand more about Shailesh and P&G's initiatives? Because I'm just running out of time here.
So Jim, great question. Again, I'm now going to reach into a slightly different part of my toolbox. Okay. What I'm aware of, and when we think about our return on research framework, we start to populate this with different sources, right? The web page, what's happening on LinkedIn, what's in their SEC filings, what are they doing in regards to social media posts, what is happening from industry analysis. And one of the ones that we really quite like is earnings calls. For those not so familiar with them, this is on a quarterly cycle for the listed companies where you have their most senior management do a prepared presentation of their quarterly business, so very, very current, and also in detail. Also, fascinatingly, immediately after that, you end up with a Q&A session, a free-form session, where the analysts, who are real, I don't know whether to say ninjas or Jedis, they're probably both, combination of a ninja and a Jedi in terms of the art of dissecting companies and asking difficult questions. They lead a Q&A session where analysts are open to have that conversation with the most senior management, put them on point, put them really, grill them. It can, at its best, feel a little bit like a blood sport, but it really is about making sure that you understand how that company is performing from an investor's perspective. So earning calls are great, but Jim, you haven't given me the time to go and sit through the 1 hour that it takes to watch the video for the earnings call, the webcast. I can manually shorten that by using a site like Seeking Alpha. But even then, what I'm stuck with is the fact that when I think about a site like Seeking Alpha, I'll get a transcript, but I hit the most common phenomenon that you really think about, which is TLDR, right? Too long, didn't read, right? And too long, didn't read really needs to be solved in a different way. So how do I solve that, right? I want to move from being inefficient and time inefficient to being very effective. So in comes Anthropic. That's the tool that I think we have to use here. So let's talk a little bit about Claude, the particular tool that Anthropic has launched. So Jim.
Yeah, just so real quick, we all need to understand Claude and Anthropic. I'll say it again. We have to understand it because this is going to be a major player in the space. They're only a couple years old. They've got $1 billion valuation, but things are happening quickly. Google put 300 million into them, and that valuation number is actually going to be much higher. Amazon, only about 3 weeks ago, Amazon invested $4 billion in this company. So we need to understand this is going to be a mover and shaker in the space, having attracted huge investment from both Google and Amazon, who of course compete in a lot of different ways, but they're achieving co-opetition, as it were, in their respective investments in Anthropic. One of the things I like about Anthropic and Claude, it's kind of a kinder, gentler. It actually calls itself a friendly personal assistant, almost like an AI concierge. So it's very good at kind of analyzing like big documents, like an earnings call transcript, and then distilling it down into something extra crispy.
Yeah. And Jim, two things I'd add to that. One is, when ChatGPT makes a mistake, it's not going to tell you, right? And you've seen, particularly one of the first early adopters was in the educational space, where students decided it was much easier to have ChatGPT write their essay and references rather than do it themselves. And then they discovered that a very authentic looking reference didn't have any origin. There was no provenance to it. It didn't actually exist. So Claude gives you a little bit more of that reassurance that actually it is supported. It also admits mistakes and pushes back when you try and push it into a different premise that's not really accepted. So that's quite important.
And what Mark, one note to that, you used the word, is interesting, hallucination before.
Yeah.
And the radar return you can get can be like, an unwieldy stream of consciousness that, once again, you said ChatGPT is not going to tell you when it's incorrect. And this is one of the reasons we all need to understand Anthropic and Claude.
Yeah. And lastly, again, it's just that, the iteration is that this is not about taking the human out of the loop, right? At the end of the day, these are going to be words that are spoken to a senior executive that carry your credibility and your trust. And if you undermine that because you've got a fact so clearly wrong, or you've got something that actually can't be substantiated, it's not going to reflect badly on the AI. It's going to reflect badly on you. So it's back to that personal ownership of the messages at the end. I do love the fact that actually Claude is moving us also faster into a true multimodal approach, which is one of the best uses of large language models, is to actually interrogate things that we already own, either as organizations or as individuals. So that could be source documents. And in Anthropic, you can upload multiple source documents, and actually the prompt input. Remember, we talked about the importance of prompts. It is about, I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but it's at least 10x what you have in ChatGPT. So if you take a long document, so you can take something like easily now, The Great Gatsby, and enter the whole text of The Great Gatsby as a prompt. And then imagine what your power is to use a large language model to interact with that without hallucination, based on really solid information. Now take that into the business world and we'll start to see what it can do. So again, a really nice, simple interface, very, very clean interface. What is it that I want to do? It also has memory of your past chats. ChatGPT is a little bit instantaneous, so it cannot necessarily remember what it said before. Yep. Claude has that history and that memory, so it can go back and refer to what have you asked it before and what did you find before. So imagine researching a customer over time. That's going to be invaluable. It gives you examples, right? So how help me practice Spanish vocab, or summarize this PDF. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take Procter & Gamble's earnings transcript, right? Very current, very valuable data. It's both the Q4 as well as full financial year for P&G, because they have a July to July fiscal. And we're getting this data on the 28th of July. This is very, very current. So you said Shailesh wants to make sure that I know the company before I meet them. How can Claude help me with that? I take it and I input the whole document as an attachment. So I'm dumping this in, again, very, very user-friendly to use that as a source document. And here's what it actually gives me. Immediately, it comes out with a summarization of this. And the summarization starts with this real core detail. Organic sales grew by 7% in 2022 and 23. It talks about the fact that I had my EPS growth also of 2%. And this is despite 1.38 billion in headwinds from higher costs. You can also see that it talks about the importance of key growth drivers include supply chain, improvements and sustainability. Awesome for me, right? Because the solution you said was cloud computing that's going to help with supply chain and also have an impact on the environment. This is spot on for what P&G would be interested in. And it has a new target of an additional 1.5 billion in gross savings. This is great for me to be able to demonstrate that I know the customer. You know, we talk about that idea of generating the feeling that I know that you know that I know. This is the sort of detail that I'd be able to actually pull out. But let's see how this runs. Okay, so does it have any more information about sustainability? Okay, from the quarterly earnings call, here's some more information about sustainability, including quotes. John Moeller is the CEO of P&G, and it's saying how his vision for that. The second thing I said, well, what did the analysts say? This is a document that has that Q&A in, and it's giving me a really great summary of what analysts' questions were and who asked those questions. And again, remember, we're trying to overcome too long didn't read, right? This is perfect because I'm now getting that accurate information in a fraction of the time. So what was I able to pull out? Okay, thinking with the end in mind, a conversation around cloud computing supply chain with a company like P&G, from the analyst quotes, I realized that they're still getting questions about gross margin, given the tailwinds from lower costs and productivity. So they've got some, you know, what is the outlook going to be, given that there are some tailwinds now from that, higher expectations from those analysts. And also, I see a really good summary of how cloud computing might help a company like P&G. I'm getting details about initiatives that are P&G initiatives, supply chain 3.0 initiative. I'm getting details really about how better visibility can help inside this company specifically in terms of things like streamlining SKUs and inventory. And critically in the CPG world, the consumer packaged goods world, how it would help strengthen retailer collaboration, how I can share insights on my supply chain visibility, strengthen integrated planning and forecasting, really specific areas that I can build into the conversation.
Mark, that's all great, but I only have 5 minutes left. And I've got this big meeting. You know, I'm jumping on Zoom with Shailesh here in a second. There's a lot of information that I've seen, but I'm out of time. How can you help me get extra crispy with a summary?
Okay, well, Jim, I think genuinely we've done enough, right? So what I've now done is I asked a large language model. In this case, I did go back into ChatGPT, put in my sources and just started to collate them, say, can you build this into a message for me? And here's what we could have in that conversation, right? If I were to help you prepare for that conversation with Shailesh, you may want to start by talking about the orientation. We're talking about supply chain strategy and the opportunities that we see for P&G. Congratulations on achieving 7% organic growth in 23, despite 1.38 billion in increased costs that they had to offset. Yet, analysts such as Peter Grom and Andrea are raising questions regarding P&G's gross margins, particularly given that you've got a goal of an extra 1.5 billion in gross productivity. Do you anticipate any shifts in the direction of your supply chain 3.0 initiative? A great question maybe to open up and see what the prioritization that Shailesh now feels they have given this challenging environment. Implementing cloud-based supply chain could really create major visibility for you. It could give you real-time monitoring of orders and have that impact on inventory across a global network. It could identify process inefficiencies, enhance production scheduling, and really just start to sort of look about how you can optimize that full supply chain. Seen really significant benefits from implementing solutions in comparable businesses, and we've been able to deliver direct cost savings, reduced logistics expenses, waste minimization, and critically, lowered inventory. We'd love to provide you a comprehensive total cost of ownership analysis that are going to contrast the direct and indirect costs and benefits and the realized savings, and we'll give it to you through the lifespan of your anticipated supply chain 3.0 project. We'll also flag how government-supported incentives for energy efficiency operations could be utilized to even give you maybe incremental funding to drive that project faster. And lastly, I think you should really raise two opportunities with Shailesh. One is about enhanced retailer collaboration, moving to something that gives you real-time supply chain insights that could be augmented, integrated planning and forecasting with those retail partners, aligning much more closely to customer demand. We live in a more volatile world. We have new consumers with new behaviors coming in. So actually getting that visibility looks more critical than ever. And in a world where we know that we are facing a climate challenge, carbon footprint and waste reduction, with automated tools that can both quantify and monitor those CO2 reductions, they can really help optimize those through routing of your supply chain, waste curtailment, and improved predictive analytics. I don't know, Jim, you gave me 5 minutes, but I think here we've got a pretty good basis for a conversation with a C-suite executive.
Yeah, so Mark, I know you and I both look at hundreds of companies a year and different things that we're involved in. And, I like to go to an annual report, to an earnings call transcript, which you showed from Seeking Alpha. The problem is there's so much information, and I'll read through, if it's in written form, an earnings call transcript might be 8 or 10 pages, and I'm poring over each item and what somebody said. And those are important because they reveal the pain points those executives don't want to talk about. So the analysts are usually getting quite assertive to say, I don't believe your revenue number. I don't believe your cost savings projection. I don't agree with, your status against the competition. So this is very powerful. So what would take me, if I was meeting with the chief operating officer, Shailesh at Procter & Gamble, I'd certainly dedicate some number of hours, probably a good number of hours, to preparing for a meeting, which you just demonstrated can be done in some number of minutes if you understand what a good prompt is. You get some help on creating that prompt, and then you're familiar with a couple different tools, ChatGPT certainly, but a couple more that would inform you the same way it's helpful to understand Google or Bing or whatever tool you might use today for search.
Spot on, Jim. So I think it's all about helping make your return on research even more valuable, right? Higher value, shorter period of time. The best analogy is to think about it as AI is going to be a new technological teammate. So it's like I've got someone on call, that assistant, as it were, that technological teammate that is there that will help me. If I can actually give my teammate clear instructions about how they can help me best, but retain the responsibility and the accountability for what I'm going to say. If we delegate that final thinking, I think we end up in a dangerous situation because, well, biggest problem is you won't understand what you're actually communicating. So I think there's two elements to it. You do need to understand your customer's business to be able to have those, particularly those elevated conversations, because as senior leaders, as C-suite executives, we all know when someone is actually at the limit of their knowledge versus they actually bring real insight, right?
Okay, Mark, before we wrap up, I just wanted to maybe just summarize an important point about AI, which is from Rob Thomas, is the CCO at IBM. AI may not replace managers, but the managers that use AI will replace the managers, sellers, or marketers that do not. So that's an important point. Before I get to maybe one or two wrap-up slides real quick, I just want to share a couple questions from the chat, Mark, and see if we can answer those. Sure. There's one from Michael Kennedy, which says, is it possible to use to prompt ChatGPT or a couple of other AI tools to read the latest CEO letter to the shareholders from, let's say, your target customer and determine what their top initiatives might be relative to what Michael Kennedy is selling?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have the subscription version of ChatGPT, You get access to a plugin that has browse mode, which means that you can direct it towards a specific site if you can identify where that site is. You can also start to, Claude is another great example where you would be able to get that as a document and plug it in, just drop it in, just like I did with the earnings transcript. And you'd be able to do that with multiple documents. So you could actually take 3 documents from customers that are in the same sort of segment or industry, drop in each of their letter to shareholders, and get Claude to start analyzing across those sources in the same way that we've just demonstrated.
And Mark, there's another good question from Bill Howe, and I know you've done this, so I'll just ask you in the moment, maybe just to describe it. We don't have a slide on it. Is how can I feed, content like this into Microsoft Word or PowerPoint? Because what you can do very effectively, and I've seen you do this, is generate some really snappy PowerPoint slides really quick.
Yeah, so there's 2 elements to that. One is all large language models are now moving into a space where they are able to code. So it still is at the moment something that requires a certain depth of technological understanding, because it's not right. It's not creating the PowerPoint slide. It creates a code in a programming language, usually Python, that can actually then be translated into something that PowerPoint can understand. So there's a sort of like a under the hood way of dealing with PowerPoint, but you can get it to do this. What you are seeing is also that those interfaces are just increasing in their ability very, very quickly. So for example, if you want to create an image now, you don't need to leave ChatGPT. You can immediately access DALL-E through ChatGPT. So it's not a separate experience now. You can do it through that. And we're going to see more and more of those coming through. And there are there's always some bespoke tools that if you want to create, for example, PowerPoint slides, just like we did with creating a great search prompt, we can do that, right? So there are some tools that are coming through.
Very good. Another quick question about Michael Kennedy. I'm going to paraphrase, or he's asking about unconsidered needs. Michael, this is what I'd say. It's such an important litmus test for a seller in preparing for a meeting. And very few sellers have ever really thought through this in my experience. Think of an unconsidered need this way. What can you tell that decision maker? Something they didn't already know about an opportunity, a problem, or risk they hadn't considered, or they did not know. Almost every culture and religion has a phrase, something very similar, of like, no one can be a prophet in their own land. And the fact is, executive decision makers are most highly defended on what they know best. So if the CEO is a former CFO, that person has an aggressive relationship with numbers. If the person is a former chief revenue officer or chief marketing officer, they're going to be experts in that. They can't be experts in everything. So use AI research to reveal these insights about your customers. Very good.
Jim, just on that point, I mean, the one thing I think is going to open up as we do get into more institutional and in the B2B world, companies using that. Imagine that you actually had every customer success plan that your company has ever made, and you can analyze those and say, what were the unconsidered needs, right, that we did discuss? And you're actually pulling that from the whole breadth of what your selling team is doing. Those are the sort of things that are opening up to us within months, right? I'm not even going to say years, but that's the sort of areas where we're going to see AI accelerate insights.
All right, so just to wrap up, we started by talking about the buyer's perspective. What are those external factors keeping them awake at night? How do they shape and create their initiatives? They need some greater change, but they need financial metrics and proof that Mark just demonstrated relative to my meeting with Shailesh, which, by the way, Mark, I'm pleased to report went very well, because I had a lot of compelling insights about their 2.0 cost saving initiative. I understood that their 7% organic growth has had serious challenge from the $1 billion plus of additional costs they didn't know they had. And then I was able to share some thoughts of what we can do as a SaaS company. So real quick to summarize, make sure first and foremost you understand your company's internal AI policies. The larger the company, typically the more sensitive they are on the subject. Secondly, you really want to be adopting that buyer's perspective. Once again, start all your conversations, whether it's an email or in voice, with the external factors keep them awake at night. That achieves what I like to call, I know that you know that I know. It establishes your credibility in the first few sentences of an email, or more importantly, the first couple sentences of a live meeting. Leverage research, as you just saw from Mark, to gain insights on their strategies, what they're trying to change, and then what business impact in terms of measurable financials that you can have. So we're all going to have to be, when Google first came out, I invested a lot of time to kind of become a PhD in Google. I'm not really a PhD, but I invested a lot of time to understand search and what keywords, commas, punctuation, what's going to get me the best radar return on doing search. And since that, now it's going to be about prompt engineering. Have some fun using different tools. We've mentioned 3 of them today. I'd say you need to be really familiar and over time an expert on ChatGPT and Claude at a minimum, and then be aware of some of the new ones like AI Mind. Use that news feed on AI Mind. They actually call it, I actually wrote it down this morning. They actually, there's something they call publication. So it's like a news feed on their website. Lastly is have fun. It's like listening to Mark today, and I know he did all the research for this one today, but it's actually a lot of fun talking the last couple of days of, gosh, how much that's available to everybody. So I just want to thank everybody for leaning in. Thanks to Mark. Thanks for our producers on the call, and we look forward to hearing back. And feel free to reach out with us on LinkedIn. Mark is on the left. He did the heavy lift on this one. So